The Untold Mystery of Green Harbor. It wasn't until I was halfway through the next chapter of an ever-changing love story that I began to understand just how deep the mystery of Green Harbor went. I was back in my tiny apartment, propped up on my bed with a cup of tea, when the story yanked me back in. The second book wasn't as romantic as the first, and I was thankful for that. It picked up where I'd left off with Darcy lying in the hospital bed. But the focus of the story had shifted from Ethan and his shirtless antics to Darcy's mysterious connections in the town of Green Harbor. I blinked and suddenly I was no longer in my bedroom. Instead, I found myself standing on a windswept cliff, overlooking a town that looked like it hadn't changed in centuries. Green Harbor was nestled in a deep valley, with crooked streets, cobblestone paths, and rows of old cottages that seemed to be slowly sinking into the earth. The gray sky hung low, casting long shadows over the harbor where ancient fishing boats rocked in the distance. Next to me stood Darcy, alive, alert, and completely different from the woman in the hospital bed. She wore a heavy fur-lined coat that whipped in the breeze, and her once ruby-red lips were now pale as if drained of blood. Her black hair, once perfect, now looked wild and tangled. "Green Harbor," she said quietly, her voice carried off by the wind. "This is where it all began." "Wait, what do you mean? What's going on?" I asked, spinning around. Ethan was nowhere in sight, which was honestly a relief. But before I could ask more questions, Darcy turned to me, her green eyes flashing. "You think this is just a love story, don't you? But there's more at stake here than you realize. Much more." Darcy's intensity was unnerving. This wasn't the same woman who had been fawning over Ethan or scheming to poison him. This Darcy had a purpose, and I was starting to suspect that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the one in control of this plot anymore. Suddenly, the earth beneath us trembled, a soft rumble that echoed through the cliffs. Darcy grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a narrow, cobblestone path that led down into the heart of Green Harbor. "We don't have much time. You need to see the truth before the others catch up." Before I could protest, we were running, our footsteps echoing on the stones as the town loomed closer. A town stuck in time. We reached the edge of Green Harbor just as the tremors subsided, and the streets were eerily quiet. The people here moved slowly, almost as if they were trapped in time, their clothes out of place, simple woolen garments and heavy cloaks. No one seemed to notice us as we slipped through the narrow streets. "Where are we going?" I asked breathlessly. "To the heart of it all," Darcy said. "The lighthouse." At the edge of town stood an ancient lighthouse, tall and imposing, its white stone exterior stained by the relentless sea winds. It towered over the harbor, casting a long shadow across the town. I had the strangest feeling that it had been watching us since the moment we arrived. As we reached the base of the lighthouse, Darcy stopped, turning to face me. "Everything you've experienced so far has been a distraction. The book you've been reading, Ethan, the romance, they were all written to keep you from finding this place." I frowned. "What are you talking about? You mean this whole story?" "It's a trap," Darcy interrupted. "A way to keep people entertained while the real power hides here in Green Harbor. This lighthouse is the key, and you're the one who can unlock it." My heart pounded in my chest. "Why me?" "Because you're not a part of the story," she said simply. "You're different. You came here by accident, and that makes you dangerous to the ones who control this world." I stared at the lighthouse, suddenly feeling a heavy sense of responsibility. This wasn't just a cheesy romance novel anymore. It was something far more sinister. The guardians of the lighthouse. As we approached the door to the lighthouse, I noticed strange symbols etched into the stone, intricate designs that pulsed faintly with a blue light. Darcy touched one of the symbols, and the heavy wooden door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of salt and something else, something metallic. The walls were lined with old nautical maps and strange devices I didn't recognize. At the center of the room was a spiral staircase that seemed to stretch endlessly upwards. "We have to reach the top," Darcy said, her voice low. "But be careful. The Guardians will know we're here." "Guardians?" Darcy didn't answer, but her tense expression told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't going to be easy. We started up the staircase, and as we climbed, I heard faint whispers, voices I couldn't understand, but they sent chills down my spine. The higher we went, the louder the whispers became, until they were almost deafening. Just as we neared the top, the air around us shimmered, and figures began to materialize, tall, shadowy forms with glowing eyes. The Guardians. They moved silently, blocking our path to the top. "We don't have time for this," Darcy muttered, pulling something from her coat, a small silver key that seemed to glow in her hand. She pressed it against the stone wall, and the entire lighthouse trembled. The Guardians hissed, their forms flickering as if they were being pulled apart, and suddenly they vanished. "Hurry," Darcy urged, and we rushed up the final steps. At the top of the lighthouse was a small room, bare except for a single window that looked out over the sea. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it a large ancient book, its cover worn and weathered. "This is it," Darcy said breathlessly. "The real story. The one that controls everything." I stepped forward, my hand trembling as I reached for the book. But before I could touch it, the room filled with light, and a voice boomed around us. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, but there was no one else in the room. The voice echoed again. "You're meddling in things you don't understand." Darcy looked at me, her eyes wide. "We need to leave. Now." But I couldn't move. Something was drawing me toward the book, something powerful. I reached for it again, and this time my fingers brushed the cover. In an instant, the world around us exploded into chaos. The lighthouse trembled, and the walls began to crumble. The voices of the Guardians roared in my ears, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. But I couldn't stop. I opened the book, and as I did, the world went dark. The truth revealed. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in Green Harbor. I was back in the Amateur Book Society's meeting room, the scent of potpourri filling the air. Lilith, Opal, and Leanne were staring at me, their expressions unreadable. "Well?" Lilith asked. I blinked, still trying to process what had just happened. What was that?" Leanne smiled faintly. "You've seen the truth now." I stared at them, confused. "What do you mean?" Opal leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "The book club isn't just about reading stories. It's about finding the ones who can see beyond the pages." Lilith nodded. "You've passed the test. Now it's time to decide. Will you continue the journey? Or will you return to the safety of your old life?" I looked down at the book in my lap, the one I had brought back with me from Green Harbor. The cover was blank, but I knew what lay inside. The real story was just beginning, and I was no longer just a reader, I was part of the plot. Title: The Untold Mystery of Green Harbor Part 2. I sat there, my mind reeling as the words echoed in my ears. You've passed the test. Now it's time to decide. The cozy, familiar room of the Amateur Book Society felt strangely claustrophobic, the walls seemingly leaning in, suffocating me with their weight. Lilith, Opal, and Leanne remained seated in their usual chairs, but their calm demeanor had shifted into something almost eerie. The tea, the cookies, the potpourri. It all seemed like a strange, deceptive mask hiding something far darker. and the book in my lap, the one I had brought back from Green Harbor, hummed softly as if it were alive, waiting for me to make my next move. What happens if I say no? I finally managed to ask, my voice shaky. Opal leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You'll go back to your normal life. Your old life where everything is predictable, and the stories stay confined between the covers of a book. But if you say yes, Leanne chimed in, her voice carrying a dangerous edge, then you step into a world where nothing is as it seems. The stories aren't just stories. They're real, and they're happening all around us. I looked down at the book again, my fingers lightly tracing its worn cover. And this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What does this book have to do with it? Lilith smiled faintly. That book contains the truth. The real truth. About Green Harbor, about the stories we've been reading, and about you. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to ask more, to demand answers to the 1,000 questions swirling in my mind, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I opened the book, flipping through its pages. The words were strange, shifting on the page as if they were written in a language I couldn't quite understand. But as I stared, the letters began to settle into something familiar. Names, places, events. All from the story I'd been reading. An ever-changing love story, but twisted darker, as if the real story had been hiding in the background all along. And then, on one of the final pages, I saw my own name. I gasped, pulling my hand back as if the book had burned me. What is this? Lilith stood up, her eyes locking onto mine. You've been part of the story from the beginning. Even if you didn't know it. Green Harbor is just the start. There are other places, other stories, and you're connected to them all. I shook my head, my mind refusing to accept what she was saying. No, this is insane. I'm just a reader. Opal chuckled softly. You were. But now you're more than that. You've touched the book. You've crossed into their world. I stood up, backing away from the three of them. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be part of some twisted story. Leanne stood as well, her face softening with sympathy. We know it's overwhelming, but you have a choice. You can walk away now and forget all of this. Or you can embrace it. The choice is yours, but know this. If you choose to walk away, you'll never be able to come back. The book will close itself to you forever. I glanced back down at the book, my mind spinning. Everything I had known, the life I had built for myself, suddenly felt hollow, like the surface of a story with no depth. But this was terrifying. I had never imagined I'd be thrown into the middle of something so bizarre, so unreal. And yet, a part of me couldn't ignore the pull. The idea that there was more out there, hidden in the pages of stories I had loved for so long, was intoxicating. What if they were right? What if this was my chance to break free from the ordinary and discover something extraordinary? My hand hovered over the book and I swallowed hard. If I say yes, what happens next? Lilith's smile widened, and the other two women exchanged a glance. If you say yes, she said slowly, you'll join us. The Amateur Book Society isn't just about reading stories. It's about living them. Together we explore the worlds hidden within the books, unravel their secrets, and protect the ones who can't protect themselves. I frowned. Protect from what? The Guardians, Opal said darkly. They're not just from Green Harbor. They exist in every story that's been written, hidden in the spaces between words. They're ancient, powerful beings who want to control the stories, rewrite them to suit their own ends. They don't want us meddling in their affairs. And they won't stop at anything to keep us from interfering, Leanne added quietly. They've already started to take notice of you. The moment you touched the book, you became a threat to them. A shiver ran down my spine. I thought back to the guardians in the lighthouse, their glowing eyes and shadowy forms. If they were real, if they were watching me, I wasn't safe. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the book. If I say yes, I asked again, my voice firmer this time, do we have a plan? How do we stop them? Lilith nodded, her expression serious. We do. But it's not going to be easy. Each story is a puzzle, and each one has its own dangers. We've been doing this for a long time and we've lost people along the way. If you join us, you'll need to be ready for what's coming. I hesitated for only a moment longer, and then I made my decision. I'm in, I said, my voice steady. Whatever it takes, I'm ready. Lilith's smile returned, and the other two women looked relieved. Welcome to the Real Book Club, Lilith said softly. Suddenly, the air around me seemed to shift, and I felt a strange, almost electric sensation course through my body. The book in my hands glowed faintly for a moment, and then the light faded, leaving behind a sense of weightlessness, as if the boundaries between the real world and the world of stories had dissolved. We'll meet again soon, Lilith said, her voice distant as the room began to blur around me. There's another story we need to investigate. Something dark is brewing, and we're going to need your help. Before I could respond, everything went black. A new chapter begins. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my apartment, sitting on my bed, the book still in my hands. But something was different. The world around me felt more vibrant, more alive, as if I could feel the pulse of the stories just beneath the surface. I looked down at the book. Its cover was blank again, but I knew what lay inside. The mysteries of Green Harbor were only the beginning. There were other stories waiting to be explored, other worlds to be discovered, and I was no longer just a reader. I was a part of the plot. And the next chapter was about to begin.